welcome to our session. I want to take a minute just to introduce ourselves for those of you who don't already know us. I am Marnie Twigg. I'm in the Writing Studies program, and I have been on the organizing body for this particular presentation, the Critical Information Literacy Committee, for before it was the Critical Information Literacy Committee. And I guess I'm going to be kind of the facilitator today a little bit, and I will present my experts. Okay. I can talk a little bit more about the committee, but if you just want to introduce yourself.
Good. You're going. Okay, so I'm Sarah Trembath. I am the interim director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, and I'm also senior lecturer in writing studies and a critical rhetorician, and I'll tell you what that is in a second if it's not clear already.
Cool. I'm Derrick Jefferson. I am a research librarian here at AU and the co-chair of the Critical Information Literacy Committee.
Jeremy Wade could not be here today, so you're just getting the three of us.
Here in spirit.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what critical information literacy is, since that's the framework that we use to approach a variety of subjects, and the ethical use of AI, the mindful use of AI in terms of thinking about racialized and gender impact. That's kind of what informs our approach. Sarah's then going to talk about some of those impacts. And we're going to share some of the best practices, how to actually put this into action, and then we're going to have some discussion and questions to kind of see where y'all are. Before we get started, I do want to talk a little bit about who we are as a committee. So I'll give you a second to read through the slide. I'll also read it aloud for those of you who might not be seeing it from all the way in the back. So, critical information literacy is a practice in the disciplines of library and information science and rhetoric and composition. Practitioners of it support learners in locating, evaluating, compiling, and using sources. And they do so with the power dynamics of knowledge production in mind. CIL practitioners encourage thinking about knowledge in terms of who creates it, how it becomes valid as knowledge, who has access to it, and how aspects of identity, including race, class, gender, and sexuality, affect it all. CIL practitioners are also mindful of fallacies of neutrality and strive to think critically about biases while encouraging such critical praxis in our students. So that's kind of the description that we give to any of our new members of the Information Literacy Committee. So we figured that would be, or the Critical Information Literacy Committee, so we figured that would be a good way to situate you. And this is just on the list of things that we do. We create materials primarily for W1 courses, but they can be useful to pretty much any level of teaching. We've created and are continuing to maintain the Anti-Racist Praxis Subject Guide, and we host workshops like this that promote like a real-world approach that can balance innovation and also having a conscience. That's kind of where we are. And I'll give it over to Derrick to talk a little bit more in depth about what critical information literacy is.
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So I don't want to have to use a mic if I don't have to. So I'm a librarian, and the bulk of what I do is couched in information literacy. And I realized after I got here at AU that what I really was doing was something that I didn't have a word for at the time, which was basically critical information literacy. So many of you, right, are scholars and educators and people here at the university are probably familiar with traditional information literacy, right, which is like looking at how to like find, evaluate sources, how to use information effectively. I think what we look at in critical information literacy is we ask why information is prioritized. We look at effectively the kind of the power dynamics behind information, who has access to it, who is paying for it. So much of it is couched in power dynamics. Another thing that comes up from the library perspective is we challenge the notion of neutrality. We reject that notion. Information in libraries aren't neutral. We are also looking at things that are rooted in kind of critical theory, critical race theory, critical pedagogy to help learners specifically understand and interrogate and intervene in systems of oppression. A lot of the work, at least in my kind of formative kind of learning, and I don't think I really kind of learned this in classes when I was in my library program. And I should say this, I also went to library school in post-Katrina New Orleans, which was really compelling and really interesting. And I think for one of the things that really stood out to me was the obvious kind of receipt of climate change, right? You can't ignore the fact that climate change and post-Katrina New Orleans kind of go hand in hand. But when I thought about climate change, right, if you ask, and I think if you ask most people when you think about climate change, what does this look like? For me, right, it's like people in Teva sandals and are very crunchy and granola-y and drive Subarus and protest, right? You know, but for me, right, in post-Katrina New Orleans continues to be a very black city, right? In a very working class city that is couched in service and hospitality and a large working underclass. And I didn't necessarily see these people represented in climate change conversations. And I ended up finding myself involved with activism and organizing, working with these populations, with people that looked a lot like me. Sorry, Colorado Springs, right? And so I think about that a lot. And so what does this look like, right? And so some of the kind of the critical texts I think that came up to me were Horton's We Make the Road by Walking, right? And that was a book that he did with Paulo Freire, which is looking at rural Tennessee, right? Appalachia, this kind of underclass. So again, we're thinking about power dynamics. I think a lot about race, but I'm also a black man in America, so I can't help but think about that because I think about the status quo and how I'm not that. Librarianship is 87% white and 80% female. And if you are not a white female and you're in librarianship, what does that look like? I can't tell you the number of times that I've had students come up, well, we don't have a reference desk anymore, but students that will come up to the desk, students that you have sent to me that have said, oh, I wrote my paper, the professor wants me to rewrite it because I didn't cite stuff properly, and they want me to meet with the librarian to go over it. Is there a librarian here? And I say, well, yeah, pull up a seat. How can I help you? And they say, no, I need to meet with the librarian, right? Because I don't fit that Wikipedia entry. Again, so we're thinking about kind of power dynamics and images and impressions. I'm a writer by nature, and I'm in the process of kind of distilling a lot of this information. I've been working with these people my entire career here, and we are always having these conversations because we're always certainly, I think, thinking about our marginalized students and our students who aren't trust fund kids or who didn't go to prep schools. And what is it like if you're a first generation student who's on scholarship and you have to get these grades because you want to maintain that scholarship? And so we're thinking about what does all of this look like. And so these are some of my notes. I'm just going to read them because I think that they're relevant and will give an impression on why we find bias in AI to be problematic, right? This is just kind of the playing ground. So in thinking about anti-racism and pursuing anti-racist lines of thought, provocation, and what that means, especially in America, my first response is to think about, and my bias is noted, anti-blackness. Because this is America, And it seems that before we arrived at the unwelcoming doormat of 2025, and we went from woke to broke, before we throttled back on how we felt about the T in LGBTQ plus peoples, because, okay, maybe we're fine with our cousin John because he's always at the theater and he's had that roommate that they share that one bedroom, that's fine. But the T, questionable, I don't know. Before we felt the need to build a literal wall, like this is Winterfell or the Upside Down, and that there were waves and droves of Latin American people flooding into the country like crazed, brainless zombies, carrying babies and illegal drugs, and they're hell-bent on causing trauma and drama. Illegal brown thugs taking over Illinois and Ohio and Texas. Before we criminalized, demonized, and minimized these populations of people, we hated Black people first. And so I struggled with how to think about this. These topics are not easy. They are complex, and they suck, and it is exhausting, and it feels hopeless. And it's not like we're going to end racism, because wouldn't that be great to end this insidious concept? Is that the goal? Racism is described as a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race over others. My experience in education and librarianness provided a North Star where I could fall on familiar faces, right? The works of Bell Hooks and Patricia Hill Collins and Alice Walker and Kimberly Crenshaw and Angela Davis. And I am well aware of my own space in this world, right? Because I think about these women where queer people in marginalized, intersecting identities were not verboten. Rather, they were spotlighted. Black feminism, which rose to prominence in the 60s with the civil rights era and the exclusion of Black women in more mainstream feminist movements that centered middle-class white women's agendas. There's James Baldwin, who The Fire Next Time is still prescient, still relevant, and still slaps. It is wild to me as a literature undergrad that he also wrote Giovanni's Room, keeping that in mind, right? But I also think as a Gen Xer, you know, the years of growing up in Southern California, Reaganomics, the rise of 24-hour cable news, crack cocaine, the AIDS epidemic, Iran-Contra. These are all problems and things that certainly hindered the growth and opportunity for Black people, and all of these things were on my mind. So with that, one of the, and I talk about this all the time with you, a student that I met my very first semester here way back when was ostensibly this kind of cis-het white status quo de facto student who came to me because you were looking at a class that explored identity. And he came to me and said, my professor wants me to meet with a librarian, which y'all do. And I said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, you know, they want me to explore identity. And I've never thought about my identity, which was shocking to me because I feel so Black all the time. And he grew up on a horse farm in like upstate New York, which is wild to me because he was now at AU and was probably like an SIS major because half of our students are. And so we sat down and we looked at like sociological abstracts, and we looked at Rillum, and we looked at people of different religions and different, you know, gender presentations. And it was, I think, he just had never, I think it was as shocking for him as it was for me. I was like, what do you mean you've never thought about your place in the world, which I feel my Blackness all the time. And so I ended up kind of writing about these like my rosebud, because I think about this student long gone from AU, and what that might have been like for him. And so in thinking about the power dynamics of being marginalized and underclass, different, not the status quo, in America, where I think so many people, even here, right, and I feel like I see students who come here and they grow up on farms or they're immigrants, and there is the notion that they need to surrender who they are to kind of come into this idealized sense of America, and they want to jettison what makes them different because they want to fit in, because they want to be Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, and they want to put on their Banana Republic drag and fit in. And I think that's sad. And so a little bit about me and why I do this work and why I think it's important. Again, this is from this in-process project. Quite simply, I hate bullies and I hate injustice, and I believe in doing what's right because it's the right thing to do. Once upon a time, I suffered from crippling depression, and when it was at its worst, at its most soul-crushing, I wasn't sure that I would survive it. I am a squinty-eyed contrarian, right? Librarian. My love and trust must be earned. I hold grudges like I have a bucket. But I'm also an empath and I feel things deeply. The highs can be very high, but conversely, the lows can be devastating. I love fiercely in work and in life, and I go above and beyond, maybe to a fault, because again, justice and believing what's right. And I share this because I think in these conversations we have around DEI, and I'm bringing it back, right? I know that we tried to get rid of it in 2025, but we're bringing it back, that it is important to examine things through a prism of racial, feminist, critical, gender, economic, class, and identity lenses. And there are parts of my identities that are obvious and others that aren't so. But there is so much more to me than what SPF sunscreen I use, or whom or how I love, how I vote, or the texture of my hair. We all contain multitudes, every single last one of us. And to be honest, I really can't wrap my head around why these are all seen as detriments rather than the gifts that each of us possess. And so I think about that a lot when I'm working with these students. And I think about that a lot when we're thinking about AI, right? This trend, this fleeting kind of train that's going by that we need to grab onto because it's the latest and the hottest and the shiniest, and how it really does us a disservice because what's lost in that conversation. I say this as a librarian, and I'm going to say this, that I think so many of us, and rightly so, I understand it, associate libraries with books, right? We have a repository, there's 4 floors here, there's 1 million volumes, I think, G, in this building here, as we're part of a consortium with 4 million other volumes across our consortial partners. And so books and information are important. To me as a librarian, what's more important than books is people. And if we don't connect the dots between how we provide information, the right information to our users, to our people, with an awareness and a sensitivity and connecting the humanity of it all, right? There are people that are worse off than you, and we have to give them thought. There are people who are doing the best that they can, and there's so much more to what we do than making the most money, getting the best job, getting it right. I taught this core class last semester, and there were maybe a half dozen students that I gave A-minuses to who reached out to me and said, "Can I talk about my grade? I don't understand why I didn't get an A." I said, "Well, I do. Have a lovely break," right? You didn't get an A because you didn't get an A, right? And this is not, we're not buying a Camry, right? This is not up for discussion. You got an A- because you, not only did you, I mean, it's 94% proficiency in the fact that perfection has to be achieved at all costs, or that that grade means more than whatever takeaways you got from my class, is a problem. And so I think about that, and I know that there's pressures and we have to keep our scholarships. And I had a student say, "Well, I'm thinking about law school." And I said, "You have 7 semesters to go. What are you talking about? You don't even know where the bathrooms are on campus." And yet the notion was like, but I have to have an A, and not what I learned from class. And so all of these things are notions with how I operate as a scholar and an educator and a teacher. And so, for example, one of the things that I was doing before I even knew that this was called kind of critical information literacy, is I was working with a professor in writing studies whose focus was like memoir. And they had their really kind of straight canonical list of stuff in their syllabus. And I said, you know what, not for nothing, what if we jettisoned your list of contributors, right, of writers, and we just, the people that we're drawing from, what if they're all people of color, immigrants, international, queer? and they're going to get, this is America. They're going to get Hemingway, right? They're going to get, Steinbeck. They're going to get this kind of traditional, canonical stuff. I said, but let's throw in a Roxane Gay, right? Let's look at Ta-Nehisi Coates. Like, let's just do that, and we don't have to put a spotlight on it, and we don't have to announce it. There don't need to be the airplane people, right, with the lights. Let's just do that because it's different and it's important. And when else are they going to get it? And again, I talked about librarianship being 87% white, 80% female. And the ivory tower, right? Education is not so far off from that. I certainly, and I've been here for 13 years now, certainly feel how Black I am on this campus, even amongst my peers and colleagues. So that being said, I think that lays the foundation on critical information literacy and the kind of work that we do and how we're trying to kind of disrupt the notion of the canon and put a spotlight on marginalized people and people who typically don't get the visibility or the notoriety, and that's where we're operating from. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more about AI in this work.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up. All right. So usually when I'm in front of people, I am much more dialogic than I'm going to be today. I like to talk and hear from people. But I really feel like there's just some things I want to put out there for your consideration. And hopefully I can do it quickly enough that there's time for questions. So forgive me for talking about the blaze through. And I also want to do a little bit of positioning of who I am by telling you what I am not. I am not an expert on technology. I am positioning myself here as a learner who is on a pretty steep learning curve because of how omnipresent this technology is and how important it is for us to get up to speed very quickly. And I say that to say my expertise is in critical rhetorical analysis and in anti-racist pedagogy. So if you ask us a question about technology, we might shrug. But we also think that shrug is important because we're all learners. And we have to approach it that way because there's something being sold to us. And I'll take that from a critical rhetoric perspective. This is so the visuals that accompany articles, blogs, ads, and instructional manuals on AI always seem to look the same, right? This is familiar, isn't it? There's a disembodied brain or a white translucent cyber mannequin head. And the head is often androgynous, but its features are always Anglo. The background is a soothing aqua, blue, green, or blue, and there are thin lines of some sort and numbers floating around, indicating connectivity and the general smarts that neither you nor I have. The future is here. It's ethereal and robotic at the same time. But the rhetoric that follows in the text always announces this future present and just says, dive in. Just do it. Just receive it. Next one, Marnie. So that's the narrative. And as a critical rhetorician, I would be remiss if I didn't explore the counter-narrative. The counter-narrative is much quieter, much less pervasive, but incredibly important for us to hear. So my dive into the topic centered around the works of these four writers, and I'll leave them up while I read from one of them. Joy Buolamwini is a computer scientist, and she's the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League. Meredith Broussard is a software developer and data journalism professor at NYU. Safia Noble is a librarian information scientist and the endowed chair of information studies at UCLA. And Laura Bates is a feminist research-based writer and founder of the Everyday Sexism Project. Each of them center stories very heavily in their works. Stories that counter that blue, aqua, green image, right, where things don't quite work right and real people's lives are impacted. I want to take a minute to read the story from Broussard's. On a cold day in January 2021, a black man named Robert Williams was at work at his automotive supply store when he got a strange call. Detroit police wanted him to go to the precinct and be arrested. Not much incentive to go to the precinct, right? Williams, who lives in a suburb north of Detroit, thought it was a prank call. He hadn't committed any crimes. Why would someone want to arrest him? Williams told the caller, well, I'm leaving work in 15 minutes, so unless you can get here in 15 minutes, you can come to my home. He shrugged off the call, finished up his work for the day, and drove home. Detroit police were waiting at his house when he pulled up in his driveway, and his squad car veered up to his SUV as if he were going to flee. "Are you Robert Williams?" an officer said. "Yes." And the officer said, "You're under arrest." Williams asked why. The officer briefly showed him a paper, and Williams saw his own name and felony larceny. Screen ahead. A full 18 hours went by when he was in the holding pen. He says, now, "I spent the night sleeping on the cold concrete floor of a filthy, overcrowded cell next to an overflowing trash can. No one came to talk to me to explain what I was accused of." He was arrested because of an algorithm. Facial recognition technology had wrongly identified him as a suspect in a robbery that happened over a year later. Over a year earlier in October 2018, when someone stole $4,000 worth of watches. So this is called facial recognition technology, and police departments are using it not just to identify people for inquiry, but to arrest people. Williams' story is only one example of the real harm done to minoritized people through over-reliance, and that's a key thing, on new technologies. In the African American community alone, Black applicants are turned away more frequently than white applicants with the same credit histories. Black applicants are offered mortgages at higher rates than white counterparts with the same data, and there are examples of every other possible bias and consequence. Substantive reform is needed. When Balwini starts her book, she tells the story about how her own face isn't recognized at all by facial recognition AI because she's dark-skinned, and because the technology needs her to wear an actual white mask to be detected at all. Bates tells a horrifying story about incels and misogynists using AI technology to create and circulate fake violent pornography, images of her in retaliation for her feminist writing. Noble relates the now famous stories of how Google map searches of the N-word used to turn up the Obama White House, and Google image searches of the word gorilla used to turn up images of Black youth. Next one. So to me, these stories raise the question, they constitute the counter-narrative, and they raise the question, are we thinking critically about AI, or are we just buying into the narrative and the excitement? As I was preparing for this, presentation, my algorithms knew I was preparing for a presentation. They know that I'm middle-aged, and these things started showing up in my social media. And I want you to hear the rhetoric. This is gold for a critical rhetorician. It says, "We are looking for women born before 1975 who don't know AI. We are starting the 28-day AI challenge built for beginners over 40. In just 15 minutes a day, unlock new skills, new opportunities, a new sense of purpose in your whole life. In 1 week, you'll feel unstoppable." Right? In 2 weeks, you'll have your strategy. In a month, you'll start to wonder why you didn't start sooner. Right? Nice one, Marnie. So when we see these things, right, are we thinking, hey, this technology sucks in a lot of ways, right? Like, that's not present. Because those people who sell the courses, they make money. Matter of fact, when Broussard wrote her book in 2023, I think it was $13 billion in the global economy for AI. And you probably noticed the year that it hit, right? It's embedded in everything, right? Every time you turn on a commercial, it's about the future is here. But in critical information literacy, we want you to be thinking about that, of course, right? So a lot of professors and universities are developing competency models, and this is a very general one. And I wanted you to see, it's got 5 different components, and the first one is technical knowledge, and for basic awareness, level 1, you have to be able to define AI-related terms and distinguish between AI myths and realities, okay? Most of AI education just has you learning how to use it. But there's many, many, many other components to being competent in it. So we're going to take a look at some terms and some myths and realities, and I'm going to offer some best practices. All right. So when people use the term AI, AI really refers to a lot of different technologies. Okay? What we're talking about in the academy most times, especially where cheating is concerned, we're talking about generative AI. So generative AI, I'm sorry, I'm a teacher and a rhetorician, so I had to just mess with their language. I'll read mine, but you can see theirs. Generative AI is a subset of artificial intelligence that compiles new content such as text, images, music, and videos by gathering patterns from existing data. Unlike narrow AI, that's those bots that pull up pre-written information. Unlike narrow AI, generative AI can assemble original content. It builds upon and replaces human creativity. I took out the words that make AI seem human. That is a major pet peeve of mine because it's not human and it doesn't think critically. And that's part of the way that they're selling it to us, right? That blue-green imagery that for some reason is always present, to me, kind of lulls me into a place where I want it. It's one of my favorite colors, right? And but the human language, right? It doesn't think, it doesn't mimic things, and it makes lots of mistakes, as you'll see. Most generative AI is a large language model, and that's what an LLM is. They function by gathering enormous amounts of text from other sources, like a database or the internet in general, and analyzing statistical patterns within the text. That's what it does. This is called training on the data, and that's really important when we start to think critically about AI. What data is it trained on, and what technological limitations there are to training? Like, is it perfect? No. And absolutely the information it's trained on is not. Algorithms are instructions given to computers to do tasks. They include sorting information and filtering data. Online, they gather data from you at the same time, and so that often leads to echo chambers. So, for instance, when I'm Googling something, I'm looking for something to read about it. So I'm often Googling things that I already know about, right? Because I might be looking for an article or something like that. But when my son uses my computer, he's on Reddit. And so he's going to be a prog rocker, so listen out for that. So he's on, yeah, he loves Genesis. He's looking up conversations about that. So when he's on Reddit, he's hearing people's opinions. So you know how when you do a Google search now, the first thing that comes up is AI? Mm-hmm. So I'll Google something that I know, and it's compiling things from Reddit, as if it's true. So because I'm pulling up things that I already know, I see that it's wrong a lot, right? Like and it terrifies me because I think if I didn't know about this subject, and it says it, right, it's designed to speak authoritatively, right? Like, I wouldn't know. But I'll pull things up, and before I can get down to the article, like sometimes I do like this as I'm scrolling, so I don't read it. But I do notice that it's wrong at least half the time, okay? It's trained on, opinions. All right, next one. All right, so now we're getting into what the critical thinking people who I showed earlier, the tech experts, are talking about. Broussard coins the term techno-chauvinism. Techno-chauvinism is a kind of bias that considers computational solutions to be superior to other solutions. Broussard says that embedded in this bias is an a priori assumption that computers are better than humans. Can you see that in the narrative? Mm-hmm. Like, it's great because it's so-called impersonal and it's mathematical and it's the future, right? But what she says is it's actually a claim that the people who make and program computers are better than other humans. So, because behind techno-chauvinism are very human difficulties like racism, bias, privilege, and greed. Looking at what a glitch is versus a bug. So AI, generative AI is not perfect, but a lot of times the imperfections are dismissed as glitches. And Broussard and these critical scientists are very keyed into that narrative. There's a difference between a glitch and what's really going on. So they say that a lot of people, when confronted with the ableism and bias in tech, tend to consider it a glitch. A glitch, though, is something temporary, a mysterious blip that might not be repeated. A bug, however, is substantial, ongoing concern that deserves attention. A bug is more serious matter that makes software fail and is worth addressing. A glitch can be dismissed. Meanwhile, a bug is substantial. It's also baked in, which we'll talk about in a second, that the biases in AI are baked in. that they're baked in from the information that the programmers use and from their own biases, let alone the technological imperfections, okay? So what these women, whose pictures I showed earlier, say is that the language of glitch does not suggest that the organizing logics of the web could be broken, but rather that there are occasional one-off moments, which is not true, okay? The term hallucinations are AI-produced incorrect or even nonsensical information. So you can do an AI search, give the, learn how to give the prompts and all that, and you can get good answers that are correct, ones that are not correct, or you can get nonsense. Model collapse is a concern of the ethical AI community that may come as internet-trained AI puts out flawed data and then gets trained on that, right? So it's like, it's right now, and then as AI-generated content becomes internet content, it will then be training information. Does that make sense? Yeah, so when that happens, we're in what's called model collapse. I love this term black box. I think it's really important. All of these scholars talk about the black box. The machine learning models are often described as black boxes because the math inside of it is extremely complicated and hard to talk about. So those of us who want to understand it, we have to do a lot of re-education to understand it. I relied on those 4 books because they're translated research. Those women have rhetorically studied how to speak to regular people. 3 of them are data scientists, and they talk like we talk. So their work is very important. But when we call it a black box, it allows us to abstract what is happening and not get bogged down in the complex mathematical conversations. Broussard says it's not impossible to understand what happens inside, but it is difficult. And that ethical AI activists are very much at work translating what's going on so that we can understand it. And as our conversation about students, I think I hit algorithmic echo chambers already, but cognitive offloading refers to the act of reducing the mental processing requirements of a task through technologies like this. And so, I love my kid to death, but I know that he thinks really differently than I thought when I was his age. Tech has his brain moving faster, and this cognitive offloading, like he oftentimes thinks that he's learning when he's really not. Because the computer's doing work for him, and he sees it, and it goes into his short-term memory, and he's like, I'm done studying. But if you ask him a question, it's like, but because I am who I am, he will have to go back and redo it. But cognitive offloading for me as a professor is a really, really big problem. It's how you know when your students have used AI to write a paper because you ask them a question and they just don't know. But when you talk to them, perhaps because they've been sold that blue-green lie, right, they are sort of defensive, right? They're kind of like, but I did it, right? Like, I put the prompt in and I got a product, right? They cognitively offloaded. And the last one is, of course, deep fakes, which is a little bit terrifying. I'm sure you know what they are. But Laura Bates's experience with her detractors creating, violent porn. I was going to read her description of it, it was too graphic, was retaliatory. And here's her reflections on it. She says, we've arrived at a critical moment. We're building a whole new world, but the inequalities and oppression of our current society are being baked into its very foundations. And if the harassment and violence that have blighted the lives of women and minoritized communities for centuries are being coded into the fabric of future systems, which they are, the forms of prejudice are going to get worse. Because they're baked in, because people aren't thinking about them critically, and because they spread so rapidly, right? Like the time it took before to print a book, get it on the shelf, and read it, like, as you can imagine, it's exponentially faster now. Marnie, can you hit us? Absolutely. All right, so I'm sorry I'm talking so fast. I'm trying to leave space for you guys. This is the book where I get my definition of criticality from. Goldie Muhammad is an educational researcher, and she says criticality is the reading of texts and contexts with an understanding of how power and anti-oppression and equity operate through society. Criticality enables us to question that's the operative word, both the world and the texts within it, to better understand truth in history, power, and equity. So as our students are thinking about how to get work done fast, how to get those A's, we really have to make sure that we're tuning them into truth. Like, what is actually true? How is that material that you arrived at, how did it get created, right? We need to have them thinking about that. It used to be in education that there'd be like your material, and then in some cases you would want people to think metacognitively about it. Now I think that metacognition is not optional. Like, we have to teach our students how to think about how they think, how to think about their information. It's just not a question. Next one. All right, so these are my best intellectual and critical practices that I gleaned from mostly those 4 books. We're happy to send these to you if you want them. The first one is you have to know what data and information your AI technology is trained on. All right? You have to be able to evaluate its credibility. Evaluating the credibility of a source is an information literacy skill. When you do that with an eye or ear or mind towards power dynamics, you're in critical information literacy. Never rely on AI technology alone for things that impact other humans' lives or qualities of life. One of these authors ran her mammogram through AI and then through a doctor and saved her own life because the AI was wrong, the doctor was right. And same thing with that story that I told about the policing, right? That technology was never intended for police officers to go out and arrest people based on it. It's maybe just to generate options for them to look into, but increasingly police departments are using it for that purpose, right? Read laterally and fact check your AI-generated search results always, right? When you get a search result, you should use it as if it's brainstorming for you, right? Like, it's giving you ideas on things to follow up on, but I'm happy to say you still got to go to the library, you still got to look at scholarly peer-reviewed works, you still have to assess the credibility of your authors and publishers. Use AI information searches for brainstorming that informs your true searches. Keep in mind that AI is fallible and inherently biased towards the perspectives of coders and the creators of training material. So always counterbalance your biases. As in Derrick's example about canonical literature versus, right, like diverse voices, you have to do that. Next one, Marnie.
Sure.
Interpersonally, right, like us as humans, we have to question the rhetoric of ads and explanations. It's a seductive media campaign, and it's omnipresent, and it all sends the same message. So you have to look for the counter-narrative, right? You have to monitor your own responses to AI fear on one hand, and AI excitement and other emotions. You have to pay attention to critiques of the environmental and socioeconomic costs of AI, because AI is going to take our jobs in a lot of ways. Right, like I had an MFA student last semester, and she taught high school where I used to teach high school. And I said, oh, I switched to academia because I had 150 students a year. I couldn't grade. How do you keep up with grading? She had 200 students. She said, oh, we don't. We run it through AI. Mm-hmm. Yes. She's an ELA teacher in PG County, 10 miles from here. So we'll be getting students who are probably writing through AI and being graded through AI, right? So as writing studies professors, we have to figure out how we're going to teach that, right? We will be starting over again in a lot of ways. So keep abreast of lawsuits against companies misusing AI. Here's one that will probably not shock you. Class action lawsuits against Workday. Because the programmers did something, allegedly, that is screening out black applicants. Right? Yes. Class action lawsuit, keep an eye on it. Because, so I have people who in my life who are applying for jobs who are taking the black stuff off, who have made our careers in black studies, who might have degrees. I have a master's degree in African American literature. Like, so that's what, there's class action lawsuit against Workday, so keep an eye on that. Familiarize yourself with the responsible AI movement and critical race technology literacies. Seek competencies with what those recommend. And the
think that's the end of
I think that's the end of
yours.
me. Okay, so I'm gonna catch my breath, and if you have any questions, I got it in.
Right, and I'm going to just kind of circle the square on both sides of our conversations, is that when you are using these tools that focus on data, that focus on algorithms, and it is drawing from a system that is inherently racist, which is inherently exclusionary, which minimizes marginalized people, and it's drawing from that as a skill set, right? How people that already have, their thumb on the scale are that much more stressed out, right? Can't get ahead, can't get a foot in the door. And it's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this. I think because we certainly have all talked about how much we care for our marginalized students, right? Our first gen students. And this urgency, I don't know what to call it, this like we have to get ahead of the game. It's AI, it's AI, it's AI. And let me tell you how I could just stare at a white wall. I am never in a hurry. I am
Analog.
from Southern California, right? So I am super kind of chill and indifferent. But I see, and faculty too, but this, and I need to hurry up. And I don't understand why that we don't slow down and that we don't close our laptops and we don't go for a walk and look at birds, right? I'm telling on myself, right? But that there is this need, and I get that it's competitive and it's grades and it's jobs, but you will get a job, right? You're great, but it's this need to be, against social media informed, I have to be first. I have to comment first. And I have to get the most, and it's that mindset that fuels, I think, even the tech people, right? Like, and
for sure.
my biggest hope and dream is that these, men who are really boys will get over themselves with this need to be, it's as if they really love the Jetsons and Star Wars and they want flying cars to be real. Wouldn't it be cool if we could ... And they're retrofitting, right? They're reverse engineering this concept of the future to bring it to fruition, and again, stripping out the humanity, taking out the people element. And I will say, right, with CoGod being all in on AI, as we are certainly aware on this campus, I really would be open to their mindset, their notion, what their thoughts are. I'm not so dismissive of AI that I can't be open-minded and objective, but at this point, I'm twiddling my thumbs, right? I'm not that I need to be impressed or that my mind needs to be changed, but I'm just curious. So
we do want to take some time for discussion, and we also
You can take my spot, and I'll take yours if you want.
Oh, sure. I am.
nobody puts baby in the corner.
That's right.
Absolutely not.
All right. So we've got a couple of questions here for y'all. I think we have like 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
Ish. Okay.
There's a
And
clock in front of you.
oh, duh. Okay. We actually have more time than
We're good.
I thought we did. We're actually good. So we would love to hear a little bit more about your vision for AU in this regard. Not just, because I know we don't just have people who are from the classroom in here. We have people from all parts of the university, which is really exciting, and thank you so much for being here. So our questions are trying to take a more holistic look at what we could do, yes, in the classroom, but also like what we can do as a university at all levels. So if you want to take, maybe let's do a little think, pair, share.
Okay.
Okay. If you want to take, 2 minutes or a couple minutes to yourself to like jot down some ideas on these questions. You're also welcome to jot down whatever questions you have for our panelists. And I think, we can put the best practices back up on there? Do we want to leave the,
Yeah, feel free to talk to your neighbor if you want to brainstorm that way.
Yeah, either way is fine. Chat works too. There you go. And we can do,
We have a room of introverts.
I mean, not me. Okay. So maybe we can start with the intellectual and critical practices and talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go. So if you want to start with chatting or taking notes on your own, thinking about some of the ways that you're already employing some of these intellectual and critical practices, or encouraging your students to do that. Because I think we're really looking for, okay, how does this translate into action? And that's where we're actually in the process of creating a toolkit that will focus on, okay, how do we take all of this that we've learned and take concrete action? So take, a couple minutes just to chat or take notes.
You didn't even have that big old thing of coffee. That was just you. On God.
This is like a danger chair.
Yep.
Backwards chair.
Not on this carpet, unfortunately. I'd want to have this on, linoleum, so I could.
Glass over there. She looks really important.
So she looks familiar, but
Have to peek her name tag.
right. See who give their association.
Why are you? One, two, three, eyes on me. That's how I always get my students when they're not coming back, is that kind of ingrained piece. So yeah, we would love to hear from y'all. What kinds of things came up in terms of how you're either already instituting best practices that Sarah mentioned, or ways in which you want to commit to that.
So this didn't come up in this discussion, but during the panel for me, because very clearly the university will move into AI, whatever we are saying, and I think many of us who are here today are concerned about racial implications or about oppressive algorithms, and so that I assume that many of us have already started to implement tools in our classes that basically teach our students AI literacy to be aware of these shortcomings. And I would be really interesting to hear what kind of tools are already floating around in this room. So hopefully I can steal many of them. So maybe we can start with putting together a toolkit.
Yeah, we're in the process.
About that, so we are actually already in the process of creating a toolkit. We actually have some of our different ideas that are basically distilling down a lot of what we've talked about today. And we were also planning to ask folks, hey, would you like to be involved in creating this toolkit? So we'll put up our information, and then if you and everybody else want to email us and get in on this effort, we would love support and expertise from other folks who are creating these tools in and outside the classroom. So yes, we're right there.
yeah, then I can put in a pitch for the Center for Faculty Excellence, which kind of, helps with this or organizes this conference. So we actually have an AI specialist right now. I serve, not at all, I'm on the steep learning curve, but I serve as an AI associate with the CFE. So I would be love to join that effort.
It's almost like our evil plan. Is what it's all part of our evil plan.
What I wanted to say, though, more substantively, I really like that notion of slowing down. I like there's so many bullet points of things that we ought to be doing, but it all sort of combines for me with this idea of we need to slow down. And I found myself kind of trying to figure out what that means for my own. I have a graduate teaching classroom to go more deep rather than broad, and I keep seeing that with sort of consultations I have with faculty, that students can now do anything at all times. It's overwhelming, and it takes like this idea that they have like 24 tabs open. It's being supercharged. It's basically like, oh, you don't, like, everything's possible. And so kind of narrowing and say, well, maybe we have work with less in depth. We have to tell them exactly which books to read. You mentioned that as well. Derrick, you mentioned this idea, I'm going to give them these 5 books, so this slowing down, focusing, going deep really resonates with me.
One of the things that I've talked about this in other presentations is that as a librarian that centers information literacy, these students I feel like they want to make the professor happy, right? What is the rubric? How do I do this? I want to satisfy this request, check off these boxes. Whereas I'm not asking you to do a lit review to make me happy or the professor happy. Right. I'm asking you to do a lit review so that you can think critically and evaluate things, so that you're not making the teacher happy, but you can apply this for your class when you're in your capstone, and when you're making a decision to take this internship over that internship, in this job over that job. And if you're successful, why you go to Costco and buy this washer and dryer and not that washer and dryer, right? Like, it's not about making me happy or satisfying this kind of request. It's about being able to think.
It's a thing. Yeah.
But when you have 36 tabs open and you're just going 500 miles an hour by the seat of your pants because that's what's being asked of you kind of societally, right? And the competition is so fierce, you lose the plot.
And one of the things that I tell my students, I read a book by Zaretta Hammond, who is an educational researcher and who studied neuroscience, educational neuroscience. And I hope I get it right when I say it, but like what her book taught me was that the more we think about difficult things, the smarter that we get. Like, students tend to think about their brains in terms of the amount of knowledge that they put in, but they are actually more able to solve new problems when there's like more folds and synapses and all that in their heads, and that comes from doing different difficult tasks. So the idea that when they cognitively offload, like, they are actually becoming less intelligent, like literally. And so because I don't necessarily like to focus on that negatively, they are bombarded, I think, this generation with a lot of negative stuff. I like to try to teach them that neuroscience to the degree that I understand it, that you wrestle with stuff because you become more intelligent and more capable of doing other things. Like, you read because you learn about the world. Like, and I have had success with appealing to them that way. And so when they get stuck doing these tasks that they don't necessarily want to do because they can do them another way, I just say, but think of how much smarter you'll be when you rewrite this paper that you did. And they're like, argh. But I think that that's important, that to help students understand what they're actually doing to themselves by focusing on the short-term benefits.
Yeah, so kind of building on the whole slowing things down, I know as faculty, I've been teaching for a while, and I know that my students back in 2009 could read a whole lot more than my students can now, and I feel like I'm constantly cutting, right?
Yeah.
But, I'm in the study of religion. Study of religion, we always talk about how there's nothing that has to be covered in an introductory course, right? And that's helped me slow things down. But also, I think, something I'm going to be trying this semester is trying to work with students about what they're interested in, which is something I include in like the pre-semester survey, they don't know why I'm asking that. And trying to like teach them how to do it really slowly. Like have them brainstorm on their own, talk about what they're interested in, what they like. Give them time in class to teach them how to use the ATLA religion database. Give them time and like give these exercises where I go, okay, so where's the article coming from? Where's that journal published? Is it a theological institution or is it an academic institution? All that kind of stuff. So ultimately, like my end goal is I want you to produce something that talks to me about what you've learned about your topic, whether it's a paper, podcast, what have you. But doing it like all semester long, building in time in class, and making very discrete tasks, and also just being transparent about my opinions about AI and why I think this will be better for you.
I love that, slowing it down into individual tasks. Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that. I'm Elizabeth Worden from School of Education, call me Lizzie. So Derrick, Mike, and I, maybe some others, taught the Encounters class for this past fall, and several of us did a very slow exercise related to what you're talking about of slowing it down, of having students do guided annotations in class, where my old self would have been like, I can't use class time to have them read in class, are you kidding me? And this was like, I made them put their phones away. It was awful. I said, put it away. I don't want to see it. Like, put it in your, It was really difficult. And I Xeroxed the reading for them. They had a guided annotation. And it was about 30, 40 minutes of class time that I would have never used before, but it was really effective. And I think we should be allowed to do that now. Like, we don't need to have every minute filled with like an activity and it meets this outcome and then we're going to apply it, and we're just slowing it down.
One of the things that in conjunction with that, and I use this as a metaphor for the students, I said, I want you to tell me about, like, we're all going to go get pizza and you can order whatever pizza you want. I want you to write about this pizza you had. There is no wrong answer. Right, but there's this idea like I have to get it. Well, what do you want me to tell me about the pizza? That's it. 500 words. So I would use that as a metaphor, and it would glitch. Right, they're like, I don't know how to do that. Right, but I'm like, this is what I want you to do. So, anyway, one more question because I see we're getting the red flag.
I just wanted to add on to that. I think inviting the students' expertise into the conversation helps them become part of the conversation. And I'm a librarian, so I don't get a whole semester. But when I teach my first year writing classes, I do a lesson where I have them evaluate what they know and understand about 3 different conspiracy theories. And one of them is true, and they have to bring their own understanding and talk to each other about it. And by centering them, then they become part of that conversation. And then we introduce the tools. And I've intentionally created this so that you can find real information. You can look at Wikipedia. If you ask AI to provide the right answer, it's not going to get it because one of the scenarios is based on primary source material. And so I think getting them to share what they already know and to understand that they're part of this process is one of those ways that we can reinforce criticality. Like, because sometimes they're saying, what do you want? Because they don't feel like they have
Autonomy or agency.
Just because they don't know everything already, that they can't possibly try.
But it's okay not to know. That's why we're here.
It's like what it really, I think at the end of the day, what we're thinking about is what is the purpose of the university? And we have this assumption that, I feel like we have this division where it's like, is the university going to like do job training and be interested in like how we can continue to exist as a university, and somehow that's antithetical to also having the approach where it's like, hey, we can be interested in innovation and technology, in possibility, and continuing to exist as a university, and that's not antithetical to this idea of slowing down and things that we can do in our classrooms. I believe we have like a survey and stuff for y'all.
Thank you.
We're also, thank you. We're also going to be working with the Ann Farron folks to make sure that you have access to our slides. and also can kind of communicate with us, especially because we'd love to share like the start of what we have for the toolkit with y'all. And
It's in
yeah,
process.
let's get rid of these silos.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you all so much.